2,390 mighty. The axis tree was so vast that it could only be perceived as a place, not as a thing. After all, it towered higher than the great peaks of Ariel's game, which were already taller than any mountain on Earth. The branch Sunny and Kai were standing on was numerous kilometers long and as wide as a field, the ridges of the bark covering it more than spacious enough for two people to walk on. A complicated tangle of similarly enormous branches extended far down and high up, creating a dizzying three-dimensional labyrinth. A whole nation could have made their home on the branches of this great tree. Today, however, Sunny and Kai were the only people populating its desolate immensity. The sun had just disappeared beyond the horizon, and although the sea of clouds still glowed with the last vestiges of a dreamlike crimson sheen, the night was already enveloping the world with a veil of velvet darkness. The world was still, but it was not silent. Instead, it was permeated by the soothing murmur of flowing water. The axis tree had been covered in snow just a few seconds ago. Now, the snow was melting, torrents of cold water cascading down the vast maze of titanic branches in a series of clear waterfalls. Sunny had expected ash and lava to replace it, but to his surprise, nothing of the sort happened. Instead, the great tree was simply stripped of its white mantle and left bare, its naked branches swaying gently in the wind. There were no leaves, no fruit, no sign of vitality to their vast expanse. In fact, countless of the branches were broken, while many more seemed frail and diseased. It was as if the axis tree was truly and utterly dead. Sunny looked around cautiously. What do you think this place does? There were 5 special squares on the game board: the castles, the shrines, and the axis tree. Sunny had mostly figured out the purpose of the first 4, but he still had no idea what the function of the central square was. Kai was looking around, as well. I don't see any structures. And I don't feel anything special, either. Sunny contemplated for a while. There had to be some use for the central square, apart from how important it was for traversing the board. The player occupying the middle would definitely have an advantage, but that advantage alone was not enough to make the square special. Granted, there had only been 4 runes carved on the sides of the jade board: ash, snow, fear, %2. Still, let's explore a little. Kai hesitated for a moment, then cleared his throat. Actually, before that, he pointed to the streams of clear water falling from high above. Wouldn't it be a shame to just waste all this water? Sunny stared at him in confusion, then scoffed. Sure, go ahead. Soon enough, refreshed and clean for the first time in a long while, the two of them ventured to explore the labyrinth of branches. Kai was in a noticeably greater mood, even humming a jovial tune quietly, while Sunny found himself feeling like a person once more. It was a nice feeling. They wandered the axis tree for a while, jumping to lower branches or flying up to those that were higher. However, there was nothing special on any of them, and as Sunny and Kai drew closer to the trunk, it seemed less and less probable that they would find something special. In the end, they ascended to the top of the tree and looked north, witnessing the next mountain over. Sunny had hoped that they would be able to see further than usual, considering the height of the tree, but he was left disappointed. Everything beyond the neighboring mountains was hidden by a haze, and even Kai could not see through it. The 3 mountains in the north, however, glanced a little odd. Sunny was not sure what exactly was peculiar about them, but they definitely glanced subtly different from all the snowy peaks they had witnessed in the south. He sighed. No luck here, I guess. He remained silent for a bit, then glanced at Kai. Possibly we should check the spot where the tree devil was staying. Kai was the only one who had seen the cursed devil resting on a branch of the axis tree, so only he knew where that place was located. He led the way. They descended along the immense width of the tree's trunk, eventually reaching one of the lower branches. The rest of them, if there were any, disappeared into the mist of the sea of clouds. This particular branch was incredibly wide, especially at its base, where it connected to the trunk. That was where the tree devil had been sitting on the day they first saw it, surrounded by snow. There was no snow covering the tree now, so Sunny and Kai immediately saw the anomaly. Here, not far away from the cursed devil's resting place, the surface of the axis tree's trunk was viciously broken, a dark portal opening into its eerie depths. Nothing but mist dwelled beyond the portal, and out of it, a river of something seemed to have flowed once, solidifying into an amber mass. From a distance, it seemed as if a river of molten gold had escaped the gargantuan trunk, most of it spilling into the clouds, while a little bit remained on the branch in small frozen puddles. Sunny approached the nearest chunk of amber substance and touched it tentatively. It was smooth, hard, and cool to the touch. Kai asked from behind him, "What is it?" Sunny hesitated for a moment. Eventually, he answered in an incredulous tone, it's literally amber. It's tree sap. Standing up, he glanced at the breach in the trunk of the axis tree and frowned. Eventually, Sunny glanced at Kai. I think it's dead. The breach was a wound dealt to the great tree a long time ago, and the pieces of golden amber were its blood. He took a deep breath. Rather, I think it was killed. The breach in the trunk of the tree was enormous, but it was insignificant compared to its titanic size. Such a small wound would not have killed the axis tree unless it was simply an opening someone used to suck its amber ichor dry. Maybe the tree devil had not spent these thousands of years simply waiting for an adversary to show up. Maybe it had drained the young sapling of the world tree of its boundless life force and vitality, devouring it hungrily to nurture his own corrupted soul. If so, then possibly whatever it was that the axis tree was supposed to grant the domain controlling it was long gone, that function of the game destroyed when the great tree died. Ariel's game was broken. Sunny looked at the pieces of golden amber with a distant expression. It was a little bit sad, and a little bit encouraging, to know that even things created by the great and horrible Ariel, the demon of dread, were not eternal. The nightmare spell had been created by a demon as well, after all. So, maybe one day they would be able to kill it, too. A pale smile touched his lips. When Neffys first proclaimed her intention to destroy the spell, it sounded like pure delusion. But it did not seem that way anymore. Looking at the deadly wound dealt to the axis tree, Sunny suddenly felt for the first time that their goal was within reach. 2391 Night Silk. Sunny was getting used to the feeling of being pursued. He and Kai had spent a peaceful night in the dead branches of the axis tree, and in the morning, the tree devil and the cursed dragon conquered the mountains to the south and west of it. He watched the western volcano be extinguished and shrouded in snow, familiar with the sight. For a few seconds, Sunny allowed himself to contemplate turning back and attempting to take out one of the devils come evening. It was an alluring idea, no doubt, facing each of the two fiends in sequence, slaying them, and arriving at the snow castle after having completely cleared the board. But no matter how much he wanted to kill the snow devils and add them to his shadow legion, Sunny knew that it was a bad idea. He had not even recovered from his wounds yet, and both Slayer and his most powerful shades were still unavailable. More importantly than that, facing these powerful creatures was at best a gamble. He might have allowed himself to become a little arrogant after attaining supremacy, but the eerie events in the recent past helped him regain his senses. In truth, he had no business confronting a cursed tyrant in his current weakened state. Even if he could wield his full power, a battle like that would be a lethal challenge. Sunny was ready to die. Losing one incarnation would be painful, but not disastrous. However, if his avatar died here, Kai would die too. And that was not something he was willing to consider. So, he had to win. The battle against the snow tyrant was unavoidable, but fighting these two devils was unnecessary. Sunny was not going to gamble 3 times in a row if he could do it just once. With a sigh, he turned away from the distant mountain and glanced at his right hand. A few seconds passed, and then, his fingers twitched faintly. A subtle smile appeared on his lips. It's healing well. There was another piece of good news, as well. His soul had been healed completely. It happened in an instant, actually, not too long ago. This incarnation of his was isolated in Ariel's game, but it still shared the soul with all the rest. That meant that they had suffered the agony of having their soul wounded at the same time as he had. But, that also meant that Neffys could heal his soul by touching any of the avatars. That was what must have happened. The rest must be really confused right about now. I'll have new stories to tell when I come out. Shaking his head, he concentrated on weaving. The pieces of golden amber lay near his feet, glistening in the morning light. In the evening, Sunny and Kai left the axis tree and crossed the obsidian bridge, moving north. The mountain did not offer them any resistance, its peak exploding in a fiery conflagration of smoke, ash, and lava. Sunny could almost move his fingers freely by then, which helped him weave at greater speed. They ascended to the smoking caldera and climbed its edge on the other side, looking north, at the last mountain they would have to conquer before coming into sight of the snow castle. And froze. What the hell is that? Sunny could not help but say the words despite promising himself to hold back on using them for a while. But he had a good reason to. The landscape in front of them was not at all what they had expected to see. In fact, it was something that no one could have expected to see, because Sunny had never even imagined something like that existing. The vast expanse of the chasm between the two mountains was entirely obscured by a vast, tattered shroud. The three peaks in the distance were overgrown by that dark mass, as well, appearing like towering pillars enveloped in black spider webs. Enormous sheets of ghostly, tattered cloth billowed in the wind, stretching for numerous kilometers in all directions, their surface frayed and uneven, comprised of innumerable strands. These eerie, tenebrous strands reached the northern slope of the mountain Sunny and Kai were standing on, as well, disappearing into the snow. As Sunny glanced closer, he saw that the dark mass consisted of myriad threads of flawlessly black silk, each of them as fine as a hair. The entire northern side of the miniature realm created by Ariel was shrouded by this black web, as if a distressing spider had made its nest somewhere beyond the horizon. The silk strands were so countless, in fact, that one could walk from where Sunny stood to the snow castle without needing the obsidian bridges or ever touching the clouds. He shivered. Ah, just what kind of horror had Weaver put on the board? Sunny remained silent for a while, then said in a subdued tone. You know, Kai, Weaver's symbol was a spider. Kai did not seem happy to hear that. Sunny shook his head slowly. But actually, it was not Weaver who chose the spider as their symbol. Rather, people commenced to associate spiders with the demon of fate. After all, spiders are masters of weaving, as well. He smiled darkly, remembering the spider silk he had found in the nest resting on the branches of the soul-devouring tree. Perhaps even spiders themselves came to see their tribe as servants of Weaver. But, come to think of it, even the name Weaver is simply a description of what that demon was. The demon of fate never shared what they knew, so they would naturally never reveal their true name either. I'd imagine someone simply commenced calling them Weaver, and that was what they went on using to introduce themselves. Nether and Hope were also like that. Their names were simply descriptions of what they were. The demon of desire gave living beings hope, while the demon of destiny ruled the underworld. The titles given to them by people had slowly become known as their names, but they were merely descriptors. So, in truth, despite inheriting the cursed lineage of the demon of fate, Sunny did not really know anything about Weaver at all. Even their name was a deception. Kai raised an eyebrow. Why, exactly, are you telling me this? Sunny cleared his throat. Well, it's just, I am trying to convince myself that the snow tyrant is not necessarily a spider. You know, Kai let out a deep sigh. Do you hate spiders, as well? Sunny forced out a smile. Not really, but I am considering starting to hate them right now. 2392 Snow Castle. When the morning came, the sight of endless webs enveloping the entire world became even more eerie. The billowing, frayed tapestries of GHO streetly black silk covered everything in sight, disappearing behind the horizon. The mountains were buried under them entirely, like gravestones overgrown by mold. Come to think of it, the mountain they had left yesterday must have been infected by the black silk as well. That was why it had seemed peculiar to Sunny from the axis tree. The webs had just burned away when the mountain erupted, but here, there was too much mystical silk for it to be consumed by ash and lava. Sunny observed the nightmarish landscape silently, slowly clenching and unclenching his right fist. I don't like it at all. There were less than 2 days left before the battle against the Snow Tyrant, which meant that he had to start preparing himself mentally for whatever it was he would face. Before that, however, he had to finish the memory he was creating from the golden amber of the Axis tree and the 3 sacred soul shards in his possession. This time, he wanted to create a charm. The design of the enchantment had already come together in his mind, and he had already created enough strings of shadow essence to weave it. Now, Sunny was simply going over the mental image of the sorceress tapestry while patiently carving the piece of amber into form with a knife made of shadows. The golden amber was impossibly tough, but it slowly gave in under the sharp blade. The form Sunny was carving was both gorgeous and easy. It was a star. That star was going to help him kill the Snow Tyrant, whatever the Snow Tyrant was. After that, he was going to give it to Saint. She had gone without a powerful charm to fit her underworld armament for too long, so he really had to make sure that the evening star glanced worthy of its future owner. I'll be able to build on the initial enchantment later, as well. These sacred soul shards are truly remarkable. The weight of the spellweave they can support is simply crazy. This enchantment I envisioned is already more intricate and sophisticated than most of what I have done in the past, and it is nowhere near exhausting their potential. Sunny was pressed for time, so he had to be truly ingenious with the design of the enchantment. The solutions he had come up with to simplify the elaborate patterns, and therefore hasten the process of weaving, were nothing short of inspired. He had even given the evening star a conditional limitation to greatly strengthen its effect when the proper conditions were met. That was actually an idea he stole from the Sin of Solace, that damn cursed sword. The Crown of Twilight relied on something similar as well, only replenishing his essence in the twilight of dusk and dawn. Come to think of it, numerous if not most of his most powerful memories had been limited in some way or another. That was what gave them true power. Sunny had always subconsciously understood that principle, but he only fully realized how to make use of it now. There was probably some deep lesson about people and their flaws somewhere in there, but he was too engrossed in his task to go on a philosophical tangent. 2 days, 1 night. That was all the time he had left before facing the snow tyrant. The first day passed in the blink of an eye, and soon, it was dusk once more. The obsidian bridge failed to come into existence. The plumes of ash stretched toward the distant mountain and commenced to solidify, but got tangled in the billowing webs and crumbled without ever taking form. Sunny and Kai observed the eerily gorgeous scene in stunned silence, then glanced at each other warily. There was no bridge, but the ash domain could still move. So, Sunny manifested a pair of black wings, and the two of them flew across the sea of fluttering black silk, landing carefully atop the northern mountain. From there, they could finally see the snow castle. And the source of black silk, the snow tyrant itself, as well. What? The creature was so immense that even Sunny could see it with a naked eye. He forgot to breathe, looking at the peak of the final mountain with a pale face. Out there, in the distance, a huge black moth was perched atop the silken peak, its tenebrous wings covering the slope. Its legs were like obsidian pillars, and its antennae extended far into the sky, swaying lightly in the wind. The block moth was distantly similar to the nightmare butterflies of Ariel's tomb, but also much more gigantic and dreadful than them. It was not even its outer appearance that was so horrible, instead, simply looking at it filled Sunny with a dreadful, eerie feeling of hopelessness. Something about the titanic moth was so malevolent, frightening, and deeply wrong that he felt the desire to give up and cease his senseless resistance. He was already doomed, after all. But that was not why Sunny was so stunned. Rather, it was because the sinister black moth felt peculiarly familiar. Come to think of it, the black silk felt familiar as well. Sunny shivered, and then whispered quietly, I know it. Kai looked in surprise. What? Sunny raised his right hand and pointed at the horrible creature perching atop the snow castle. I know that creature, or at least its kind. He had never met the snow tyrant, but he knew it well. It was the puppeteer. It was a puppeteer worm, who had become the puppeteer moth. After escaping from the chrysalis of human minds it had twisted, used as nourishment, and then destroyed. Sunny remembered the description of the puppeteer's shroud. A worm of doubt once found its way into a righteous king's heart. With time, the king was devoured from the inside and became its puppet. A lifetime later, the puppeteer worm escaped from the king's dead body, leaving behind a cocoon of black silk. No one knows where it went. However, once people dared to approach the silent castle, they found the silk among the mountains of gnawed bones and fashioned it into an armor. He did not know whether the creature he was facing was the same puppeteer worm who had been responsible for the birth of the Mountain King, or simply the most accomplished member of their harrowing kind. All he knew was that the description of his old armor failed to mention what a larva evolved to after leaving its chrysalis. He was looking at what it had become right now. 2393 Who puppeteers the puppeteers? As darkness shrouded the world, Sunny and Kai sought shelter from the eerie gaze of the puppeteer on the other side of the mountain. Sunny sat in the ash, his 6 hands dancing in the air as he wove the complicated enchantment of the evening star. One of them was giving him trouble, but he worked through the stiffness and the pangs of Roain. His expression was both focused and distant, as if he was in a state of flow, but also rattled to the core. As the radiant patterns of the sorceress tapestry took form, he could feel his shades being mended. The obsidian wasps were restored first, then the shadow wolves in abundance. The wolf was going to recover soon, too. Slayer was close to being fully healed as well. The shade of the Rat King, meanwhile, had never been vanquished, so Sunny could summon it at any second as long as he wished to. The puppeteer moth, really, now? Sunny was a little shaken. Locking these feelings in an isolated partition of his mind, he allowed that part of him to take control of his mouth and spoke quietly. What a splendid coincidence. Meeting a nightmare creature that was connected to his first nightmare here was truly unexpected. Unbelievable, even. What were the chances? It was almost as if someone, a certain nebulous demon, perhaps, had pulled the strings behind the scenes to make it happen. Not the strands of black silk that the puppeteer used, though, but an entirely different kind. The strings of fate themselves, maybe. Who was the real puppeteer here, then? Suddenly, the giant black moth perching on the peak of a towering mountain did not seem so traumatic anymore. It even seemed a little pitiful. But, naturally, that feeling only lasted for a moment. Kai, who had been staring at the stars idly, turned to look at Sunny. But how do you know that horror? Sunny remained silent for a few seconds, engrossed in weaving, then shrugged. It was mentioned in the description of a memory I owned. It was the second memory I had ever received, actually, and its description was quite memorable. Because of how creepy it was. Who knew I'd meet that creepy nightmare creature myself, one day? He sighed, then shook his head slowly. But, actually, it is a good thing. It is a wonderful thing, even. Sunny glanced at Kai and tried to smile. Knowledge is the origin of power, after all. Few things are more important than knowing your adversary. I thought we would have to go into battle against the snow tyrant blind, but would you look at that? Now, we don't have to. We know quite a lot about it. In fact, we know the things that matter most. He glanced away and contemplated the situation for a while. Eventually, Sunny said, the puppeteer's moth can also be called doubt, I guess. That is the essence of its power. It infects the hearts of living beings with doubt and turns them into puppets. In other words, it is an immensely potent manipulator. I hesitate to say that the puppeteer specializes in mind attacks, because at its level of power, these distinctions are somewhat meaningless, but fundamentally, that is what it does. He took a deep breath, then smiled. Which means that we are actually in a highly advantageous position. These types of nightmare creatures usually rely heavily on their insidious powers and, most of all, on their thralls, but they themselves are relatively weak and frail when it comes to physical confrontations. And what did we do here in Ariel's game? Kai studied him for a few seconds. We killed most of this creature's thralls and put ourselves in a position to attack it when it's alone. Sunny nodded. Indeed, that is what we did. So, in a way, we are incredibly lucky. Of all the cursed tyrants in the world, this one might just be the easiest to kill, considering the circumstances, that is. Not that killing it will actually be easy, naturally. A cursed tyrant is still a cursed tyrant. He exhaled slowly. We got rid of most of its thralls and outran those who remain, true. The puppeteer is huge and monstrous, but it won't be that fearsome in a battle, relatively speaking, I mean. I'd say, between that thing and the wolf would be more furious. There was a long stretch of silence, and then Sunny added in a concerned tone, but that does not mean that facing the puppeteer won't be infinitely more hazardous than facing the wolf was. That is, naturally, because while we did kill most of its puppets, the real difficulty will be not becoming its puppets ourselves. Sunny could not help but shiver. I would imagine that a cursed tyrant can subjugate someone like us in an instant, as long as we give it a chance. It will make us doubt ourselves first, and then, before we know it, there will be invisible strings wrapped around our hearts. Doubt, that was the weapon the puppeteer would use against them. Doubt was truly an insidious concept because no human was really immune to it. Even supremes like Sunny were susceptible to doubt. As for saints like Kai, Sunny glanced at his friend and shook his head. Actually, I am not really worried about you. Kai raised an eyebrow. You're not. But, I am quite an insecure person. I doubt myself all the time. Sunny smiled faintly. That is exactly what makes you dreadful prey for the puppeteer. You do indeed seem to suffer from self-doubt a lot, and yet, you have never allowed it to control you. On the contrary, you have overcome yourself at every step of the way. It is like you've been training for this exact moment all your life, really. Kai, despite his lack of confidence, was a faultlessly dependable person. He never failed to rise to the occasion, even if he struggled to get there more than the rest of them did. Sunny sighed and shook his head. In truth, I am much more worried about myself. 2394 Confluence of Contradictions. Kai smiled at first, as if assuming that Sunny was joking, then looked at him with surprise after realizing that he was telling the truth. You are worried about yourself more than you are about me. Sunny simply nodded. Yes, I am, especially vulnerable to what that thing has in store for us. Kai remained silent for a few seconds, then shook his head. I find it hard to believe. You are a supreme, after all. Didn't you tell me yourself that a sovereign is someone who dares to bend the world to their will? How can someone be that obstinate and doubt themselves at the same time? Sunny glanced at him with a dark expression and shrugged. Well, what can I say? People are calm, located creatures. They can be two different things at the same time. So, I can be sure of myself so much as to force the world to agree with how I feel, but also doubt every single thing I do. He was indeed someone who possessed a will sharp enough to cut the world. But, at the same time, Sunny's existence was deeply ambivalent. He loved Neffys and enjoyed her affection, as well. But, at the same time, he always doubted her feelings for him and questioned his place in her life. The person she knew was only a husk of the real Sunny, after all. So, he wanted to reclaim his fate and make her, and everyone else, remember him. But, at the same time, he wasn't really sure that he wanted it desperately enough to pay the price of becoming bound again. He was determined to resist the horrors of the nightmare spell and protect humanity, but at the same time, he was hiding his existence from everyone, forced into the shadows by the cursed lineage of the forgotten god. Sunny was a confluence of irreconcilable contradictions. On a good day, and a bad day, he was one push away from losing control and falling into a murderous frenzy. All these conflicting emotions had been simmering quietly in the background as he lived his life. Usually, they were not a problem. But tomorrow, each of the unresolved doubts he harbored would become ammunition the puppeteer could use to destroy him. Each of them was a crack in his armor through which the enemy blade could slide. So, tomorrow's battle was not going to be fun for Sunny. He groaned. "Ah, I really hate nightmare creatures who mess with my mind the most." Shaking his head, Sunny resumed weaving the enchantment of the evening star and grumbled. "Well, you don't have to worry about me, really. I'll handle it. If everything else fails, pure spite has never let me down." His expression turned concerned. "That said, I expect the battle against the puppeteers to be horrible enough to push me to the limit. Far beyond my limit, really. I might be forced to resort to doing something really desperate. If I do, your role will be the most important. You will have to help me come back." Kai frowned. "Come back? What do you mean?" Sunny smiled faintly. "It's easy, really. You'll have to make me remember myself. By reminding me who I am." Kai stared at him for a while, then cleared his throat. "But, Sunny, I am sorry to say this, but despite our wonderful rapport in these last couple of weeks, I don't really know who you are. We are barely acquainted." Sunny let out a laugh. "Fair enough." Then, he scowled. "No, wait, what do you mean, barely acquainted? You and I are best friends. We fought side by side and killed literal gods together. We rolled in the same mud and ate the same rats. Are there even a closer pair in the world than us?" Kai coughed. "I didn't eat the rats, though." "Oh, right, he refused to partake in the rat barbecue, the fool." Sunny sighed. Naturally, Kai was right. How could Kai make Sunny remember himself if he himself could not even remember the real Sunny? It sounded like a problem, but actually, the answer was quite obvious. In fact, Sunny had experienced a very similar situation once, only his role now was the opposite of what it had been back then. A long time ago, Neffys had taught him how to make her escape the mind hex of the Soul Devourer, at least to a degree. All he had to do was recite 3 names to her, the names of the people she hated, and would therefore remind her of the most important thing in her life. Her ardent desire to destroy the spell. Aster, Song, Veil. Sunny had to come up with an Aster, Song, Veil of his own. He hesitated for a while, then said, "Just recite a few names to me: Neffys, Cassie, Effie, Kai, Rain, Jet. If that doesn't help, throw in Noctis and Anank, Aiko, Julius, Beth, Kim, Luster, Quentin, Dorn, Belle, Samara, Obel. That should do it, I think." These were the strongest connections to his sense of self he possessed in the absence of a true name. The tethers that bound Sunny to the world, and therefore shaped him. If anything could remind him of who he was, and what was most important to him, it was these names. In an odd way, these few words were the most meaningful summation of his life. Kai gave him an odd look, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll remember." He lingered for a while before adding, "I must admit that I feel a bit weird about my name being there, though." Sunny grinned. "What can I say? You make an impression." With that, he beckoned Kai to come closer. "Oh, by the way, I am going to punch you really hard now." Kai blinked a couple of times. "Huh, what? Why?" Sunny shrugged nonchalantly. "You see the horizon? The sun is going to rise soon. I doubt that the puppeteer will leave the snow castle, but it can surely subject us to some kind of terrifying mind attack without moving. You don't want to endure a mental attack of a cursed tyrant more times than necessary, do you?" Kai moved back a little, a wary expression on his face. "I don't, but what does it have to do with me getting punched?" Sunny scoffed. "I mean, the best way to avoid a mental attack is to be unconscious. That's just common sense. So, come closer, it will only hurt a little." Kai, however, did not come closer. A few moments later, a cloud of ash rose above the slope of the towering volcano. 2395 check. In the end, Sunny did not punch Kai into unconsciousness. The charming archer did, however, put himself into a state of deep slumber by commanding himself to sleep without seeing any dreams. Sunny remained nearby, standing guard above his sleeping figure while focusing completely on weaving. When the sun rose and an ethereal bridge of glistening glass formed between the snow castle and the fuming volcano, a terrifying mental attack did, indeed, descend upon him like divine punishment. Sunny winced as his hands faltered, a sudden discord introduced into the vast tapestry of essence strings he was weaving. Is it playing with me? Shaking his head, he corrected the flawed pattern and continued with his work. The puppeteer seemed to be probing his mental defenses. Even then, that single distressing attack easily pierced his resistances and the invisible armor of will he had forged around himself, forcing its way into his mind. Sunny felt himself reeling, an insidious presence taking root in his head. His sense of reality started to fall apart. Grumbling under his breath, Sunny partitioned the compromised part of his mind and isolated it from the rest of him. It helped to cope with the insidious, irresistible mental invasion of the puppeteer, but only for a short while. Soon enough, the tendrils of mind-altering corruption spread beyond the walls Sunny had erected, infecting more of him. Luckily, it was not the capital letter corruption, but simply the mental plague summoned into existence by a cursed tyrant instead. Luckily, does that word really apply here? Sunny smiled darkly. Just a fallen god taking over my mind. No big deal. He isolated the newly compromised parts of his mind too. Let's see who'll last longer, bastard. Sunny had developed quite a breathtaking ability to split his mind into innumerable streams over the years, after all. From perceiving the world through his shadows, to controlling 7 incarnations, to commanding the vast Shadow Legion and watching over the members of the Shadow Clan, he was quite adept at compartmentalization by now. As the sun was rising from beyond the horizon, he and the puppeteer played an eerie game. The giant, Black Moth slowly conquered more and more of Sunny's mind, while Sunny calmly quarantined the contaminated parts and went on weaving. It grew more and more difficult as time went on, however. His hands slowed down, and the vision of the vast pattern of essence strings he held in his mind turned blurry. By the end of it all, Sunny halted completely, staring into the distance with an absent expression. He was uncomfortably close to starting to drool. Then, the sun separated from the sea of molten gold it had turned the clouds into and hovered above the horizon, slowly climbing up. The ethereal glass bridge evaporated, and at the same time, the foreign presence that had been slowly consuming his mind retreated in an instant. Sunny let out a shaky breath and reassembled his mind into a single whole, swaying lightly as he did. He remained motionless for a few seconds, then resumed weaving with a concerned expression. His lips were pursed, and his voice was subdued. Ah, that was quite unpleasant. And it had been merely a probing attack, at that. Experiencing the full brunt of the puppeteer's might would be a far more appalling experience. Sunny grimaced. Throughout the day, as the weave of the evening star came together, the things he had been waiting for happened one after another. Kai woke up from his deep slumber. The wolf and its pack were fully mended. Slayer recovered from her wounds almost at the very last moment and rose from his shadow, just as full of malice and malevolence as she had been before. The murderous shadow had been absent for a few days, so he had to fulfill the conditions of their deal and make a blood sacrifice to her once more. Slayer drank deeply of his blood, and once again, her obsidian eyes seemed to ignite with a hint of remembrance for a few fleeting seconds. But then, they slowly reverted to being cold and unfeeling, devoid of their splendid luster. This time, for the first time, Sunny felt disturbed by the subtle change that had briefly happened to his shadow. He could not help but ask himself once again. Did she really kill Weaver? The graceful shadow stood motionlessly by his side, her hollow eyes betraying no emotion. In the end, Sunny had no choice but to look away and concentrate on finishing the last patterns of the vast spellweave he was creating. It was coming together well. The evening star was the first sacred memory he would create. And although it was not entirely finished, still, he could already tell how different it was from all the other memories he had created. That was because of its very nature. A sacred memory was an immensely powerful thing, powerful enough to interfere with causality and bend the laws of existence, even, just like deities could. However, it was just that, a thing. It possessed neither will nor intent, and therefore, it lacked the authority to achieve what it was designed to do. How could it function, then? The same way the lesser memories functioned, naturally, since memories did not have souls, they strengthened by the soul essence of their master. Similarly, a sacred memory had to strengthened by the soul essence, the spirit essence, and, most importantly, the will of its master to realize its potential. Not just anyone would be able to use the evening star to its full extent. Sunny sighed. I still have ways to go. Weaver's mask and the shadow lantern did not have the same problem, after all. They were divine memories that even a mere awakened could use, which meant that whoever had created them infinitely more proficient at weaving than Sunny was. Well, naturally, they were. After all, Weaver's mask had been created by none other than the Demon of Fate, while the shadow lantern was a replica of Shadow God's relic created by the Nightmare. Spell. I'll get there, someday. Maybe. The sun was already rolling toward the horizon by the time Sunny completed his sorcery. The breathtaking star carved out of golden amber lay on his palm, its intricately engraved surface glistening in the eventide glow. He sighed, then manifested the jade mantle and brought the evening star to the center of his polished black breastplate. Their armor swallowed it, and as the sacred charm drowned in the dark stone-like metal, disappearing without a trace, it was slotted into the underworld armament. Pouring his essence and will into Evening Star, Sunny felt a subtle power flow into his limbs. Works as a charm. He smiled darkly, deactivated the enchantment, and rose to his feet. The sun would soon touch the sea of clouds. The battle against the puppeteer was about to commence. Throwing a look at Kai, Sunny lingered for a few moments and asked, "How about it? Are you ready to get the hell out of this dreadful place?" Kai nodded calmly. "Oh, I am. I've been dreaming of taking a proper shower for a week straight." Of course he has. Sunny sighed, then glanced at Slayer. "What about you? Have something to say to me?" Slayer did not deem it worthy to give him an answer. Instead, she simply checked if her swords slid out of their sheaths smoothly. Sunny shook his quietly and glanced north. The sea of clouds was drowning in darkness in the east while burning with a fiery crimson glow in the west. The plumes of ash were stretching toward the snow castle like black tendrils. Soon, they turned into an obsidian bridge, its surface glowing as if illuminated by innumerable embers. Taking a step forward, Sunny called upon the shadows and ash. As he stepped onto the bridge, a tide of darkness followed him like a boundless mantle. 2396 Evening Star. As Sunny walked across the bridge, bringing the ash domain with him, the huge black moth perching on the peak of the distant white mountain shifted a little. Its size was so immense that, from a distance, it seemed as if the mountain itself moved. Suddenly, he could sense something vast, ancient, and utterly alien gazing at him. It was as if everything about him was revealed under that frightening gaze. The entity studied him with a dispassionate thoroughness, like one would study a strange and curious specimen after dissecting its body. Then, the entity seemed to lose interest. The heavy gaze followed Sunny, but it felt far less penetrating than before. He glanced up at the titanic black moth's face, if it could be called that. It was covered by what looked like soft black fur, with two enormous spherical eyes protruding from it on either side. Its maw was hidden from sight, and its two enormous antennae swayed faintly in the wind. Apart from the fact that each was hundreds of meters in length, they looked like the long cushy eyebrows of a wizened sage. The puppeteer stayed motionless, and it was that lack of movement that made the sight of a titanic moth so eerie. Sunny would have been less tense if the tyrant tried to threaten him or showed a hint of preparing for battle. But the creature stayed still, simply looking at him impassively. "It's not taking me seriously at all." The sea of clouds below was glowing, painted in a million shades of maroon and crimson by the sunset. Sunny took a step and activated the enchantment of the Evening Star. The shadows surrounding him seemed to grow darker, and the veil of ash more impenetrable. He felt more powerful. He was more powerful, in fact, albeit not by much. For now, the enchantment of the Evening Star was immensely potent, but simpler in execution than many he had woven before. That was because Sunny had chosen not to rely on the usual patterns he had memorized or developed while designing it. Instead of meticulously weaving the paths and mechanisms its enchantment was to follow, he wove the very concept of what it was meant to achieve into the pattern instead. Sunny based the spell weave of the Evening Star on two simple concepts: abundance and power. The Evening Star was meant to grant its master an abundance of power. Not the physical strength, soul potency, mental fortitude, or even willpower, but simply power, in all its shapes and forms. Sunny did not need to meticulously design how that effect would be achieved precisely because he had based the spell weave of the Evening Star on concepts as opposed to sorcerous principles. After all, the Evening Star was a sacred memory. The ways in which it functioned were not as important as the very fact that it did. It did not work by adhering to cleverly designed patterns of cause and effect, Instead, it worked because it bent the world into a state that supported its effect. The effect came first, while the cause followed. That was how sacred beings exerted their power, so Sunny had surmised that that was how a sacred memory should function, too. The shift in the approach to designing a spell weave was so different from everything he had done before that it was hard to wrap his head around it. But once Sunny shifted his perspective and saw the foundations of sorceress mechanics in a new light, the patterns he envisioned were actually simpler than what he had been creating before. Of course, a sorcery like that could only be strengthened by a master whose will could shoulder its burden. But as a supreme titan, Sunny was more than qualified to do just that. Granted, creating a memory that was simply supposed to make its master more powerful would not have been very useful. There were limits to his will, after all, and even if there were none, a simple sorcery like that could not bend the laws of the world too much. The effect would have been negligible. That was where the artificial limitation he had built into the spell weave of the Evening Star came into play. By limiting the sacred memory himself, he allowed it to bend the laws of existence much more than it would have been able to otherwise, as long as proper conditions were met. It was as if he was focusing its power into a narrow ray instead of unleashing it upon the world as a diffused wave. The limit Sunny had placed on the enchantment of the Evening Star was as follows: its potency depended on how bright the world around it was. This sacred memory was almost entirely useless when surrounded by radiance and light. It grew exponentially more powerful the darker its surroundings were, though, and reached full potency in utter darkness. And since Sunny could only attack the snow castle at sunset, the Evening Star would enhance him more and more the closer nightfall came. The augmentation of a sacred memory was already immensely powerful. However, there was also the underworld armament trait of the Jade Mantle to consider, the trait that enhanced the effects of any charm slotted into the tenebrous armor. In short, the longer Sunny survived in the battle against the puppeteer, the stronger he would become. Any augmentation was important, but this one, in particular, was especially vital due to the fact fighters usually grew exhausted and weakened by the end of a vicious battle. In that state of fatigue and vulnerability, every drop of power was especially precious. So, hopefully, the puppeteer was in for an unpleasant surprise. Of course, Sunny was quite certain that the detestable creature had a few surprises in store for him, as well. All his senses grew taut as he approached the end of the bridge. All his muscles tensed in preparation for a furious, fatal battle. Sunny inhaled deeply, then gritted his teeth and stepped onto the snowy slope of the towering mountain. He had expected a destructive mental attack to slam into him immediately, possibly even some kind of profane assault that he could not even imagine, let alone describe. He had prepared himself for anything, or so he had thought. But he was wrong, because what happened next left Sunny completely stunned, and more than a little bit rattled. Instead of a tyrannical assault, what met him on the slopes of the snow castle was a voice. The voice resounded from all around him, subtle and strangely soft. It said, "Welcome, Liberator. Oh, I've been waiting for so long." 2397 to a flame. Sunny froze. He was not being subjected to a distressing attack, and yet, that did not make him feel any less alarmed. If anything, he felt more shaken than he would have if the puppeteer had thrown all its profane power into an obliterating assault. Because despite the fact that the world had changed, and Sunny himself was vastly more powerful now than he had been before, one truth remained the same since the turbulent days of his youth. It was that among all the horrors of the nightmare spell, none were more sinister and harrowing than the ones who could speak like humans. Damnation! He glanced up and studied the motionless puppeteer, who loomed far above him like a black insectal cliff. "Don't answer, don't answer, don't." Then, his lips moved on their own. "Who's speaking?" There were a few seconds of silence, and then the soft voice resounded from nowhere. It was as if the wind itself was answering. "I am Moth." Sunny narrowed his eyes, unsure what to say. The cursed tyrant was talking to him. The frightening moth perching atop the mountain was engaging him in conversation, and on top of that, it was polite and soft-spoken. "What the hell?" He exhaled slowly. "Why are you talking to me, though?" The puppeteer remained silent for a moment, then answered with a question of its own. "Why not?" Sunny could not help but let out a stifled chuckle. "This is ridiculous." His flaw still forced him to answer, though. "Because you are an abomination. And nightmare creature. You and I are enemies, no?" The huge moth moved its antennae faintly. "Are we enemies?" "Why?" Sunny laughed. "Why? Oh, actually, you raise a good question. You, creatures of corruption, are all completely overcome by a demented need to eradicate anything and everything that is good and pure. I have no idea why, so now that I have the chance, let me ask you instead. Why the hell are you, vile fiends, so hellbent on destroying us humans? The puppeteer remained silent for a while, this time. Eventually, he seemed to sigh. Words have power, Liberator. The power of names is even greater still. And yet you use that power with such violence. You force them upon the world. The giant moth tilted its head down, looking at Sunny with its enormous black eyes. Corruption, nightmare creature, fiend, vile. Pure, good. These words you use may not form existence, but they form you. They form everything you touch, as well. They even form me. The winds howled, and the glistening strands of black silk enveloping the mountain fluttered in it like a tattered shroud. The cursed tyrant spoke again. What you have named corruption is the influence of the void. It does not corrupt things, it simply changes them. These things it changes are not malevolent or vile, just like the things it spares are not pure and good. They are merely different. However, when the puppeteer spoke again, its soft voice sounded a little mournful. There exists a contradiction between those of us who have been touched by the void and those of us who have not, indeed. That contradiction gives birth to conflict. Those of my kind who are young and weak are not detestable. They are pitiful. They are neither of the void nor of the flame. They belong to both, but are welcomed by neither. The colossal moth moved its wings faintly, causing hurricane wind to blow across the silken mountain. Sunny shielded his face from the dancing snow and grimaced. This thing is really huge. The puppeteer continued. Their existence is a battlefield, and the war they wage against themselves drives them mad. In that anguished state, they are lost and blind. All they can do is desperately seek salvation, like moths to a flame. They are consumed by the desire to possess the flame or to extinguish it. They are overcome by a misguided need to resolve the maddening contradiction and right everything that is wrong, with the world, and with themselves. Only then would they know solace. Sunny smiled darkly. Solace. The reason for all this misery is that they seek solace. How truly ironic. No wonder someone told me once that solace is a sin. The puppeteer stirred. It is in the depths of the flame. Life is war, peace is death. These are the laws carved into existence by the incarnations of flame. Sunny was getting a little confused. The way the puppeteer spoke and the names it used were peculiar. The flame. Since the puppeteer described the flame as the opposite of the void, it must have meant the vast universe created by the gods, the existence itself. Or did it mean the original desire, from the flames of which the gods had been born? Possibly it was both. There was probably no distinction between the two for a creature like the puppeteer. The incarnations of flame it mentioned were the gods, then. While Sunny considered the implication of these words, the soft voice spoke again, this time hiding a hint of enmity. What a grotesque, cruel world they've created. Here, solace is indeed a sin. But more than that, it is a lie. There is no solace to be found, not for you, and not for me. Those poor wretches of my kind who are blinded by the flame cannot see the truth, but I am different from them. I am not blind, and I am not drawn to the flame. I have no desire to become ash. Sunny frowned, staring at the giant black moth with a peculiar expression. So, what you mean to say is that only the weaker abomination can't overcome the irresistible urge to devour and destroy anything not touched by the corruption. But you are so much stronger and above them all that you can keep that urge in check. In fact, you are not beholden to the corruption at all. The puppeteer did not answer immediately. It remained silent for a while, and then asked suddenly, a hint of something strange and eerie seeping into its seemingly soft voice. You have never known anything but the flame, Liberator, so you do not question its tenets. But let me answer the question you asked of me with a question of my own. Why do we have to be enemies? Is it because of me, a creature touched by the void? Or is it because of you, a creature born of the flame? Of the flame, where Leafy was war, 2398 fuel of desire. At first, Sunny laughed. The question was really too preposterous. What was the puppeteer's insinuating? That the horrors of the modern era were caused by humans, and not by the plague and nightmare creatures lusting to destroy and devour the world. Oh, it is definitely because of you. Believe me, I am quite a peaceful person. You can even call me the heir of peace, if you wish. Well, Sunny did have an army of tens of thousands of dead souls dwelling in his own, all of whom, most of whom, at least, he had personally killed. But that was not because he was a bellicose and violent person. He had just been forced by the circumstances to go on a rampage or two. And while few even among the nightmare creatures had caused as many violent deaths as Sunny had, that was not because he particularly enjoyed slaughter and carnage. Well, he did enjoy them sometimes, but not that often. Very rarely, really. Sunny opened his mouth to say something, but then closed it again. He wanted to explain that humans would have left the nightmare creatures alone if the nightmare creatures did not represent an existential threat to humanity, if they had not attacked first, but that would have been a lie. After all, humans had managed to eradicate most life on Earth, and had almost eradicated each other, long before the nightmare spell descended. They were full of avarice, violence, and insatiable desire to have more, spread more, be more. They pillaged and plundered anything and everything that was of value relentlessly, repeatedly, and without remorse. So, if there had really been a flock of harmless nightmare creatures grazing peacefully somewhere on a meadow, humans would have probably slaughtered them and dismantled their precious bodies for parts. The soul shards alone would have been a reason to drive them to extinction. Sunny pursed his lips, suddenly unsure of himself. Eventually, he simply repeated, "Yeah, it is most likely because of you." The puppeteer seemed to look at him with pity. After a few moments of silence, the soft voice spoke again. "There is a far more meaningful question, Liberator. The incarnations of flame, why did they create their cruel world this way? Why must they make life a constant struggle, and deny solace to the beings trapped in the cage of their design? Why is there desperation, desire, hope, and war? Tell me, creature of the flame." Sunny suppressed the desire to scoff, surprised by the sudden philosophical question. Philosophical questions, by definition, had no answer, that was what made them such, to begin with. So, the better question would have been why the puppeteer insisted on wasting his time. But then, the derisive smile slowly drained from his face. Because Sunny suddenly realized that he knew the answer. He lingered for a few moments, and then whispered in a stunned voice. "Because the flame wanes." The black silk fluttered in the wind, its many strings rustling like a sea. The soft voice of the puppeteer was born from that rustle. "Indeed, the flame is desire, and desire is the flame. But flame needs fuel to burn, Liberator. It needs to be fed. It needs to devour something in order to sustain itself. Our longing, our yearning, our desire, our hope, they fan the flame. You and I are different, but in the end, we are both the same. Our lives are fuel, and we only exist to be devoured by the flame." The giant black moth lowered its enormous head, staring at Sunny from above. "We are both prisoners of this game, as well. We are different, yes, but we are the same. What we share is far more immense than what divides us. And so, there is no reason for us to be enemies." Sunny shifted, engrossed by the truth, a version of truth, at least, offered him by the puppeteer. His mind slowly drifted to its last claim, and after hesitating for a short while, he asked in an even tone. "We are both prisoners. Is that why you keep calling me the Liberator?" The giant black moth's antennae swayed lightly. "Yes. A long time ago, the one you call Weaver offered me a bargain. I would help them defeat the demon of dread in the death game, and in return, they would twist the strings of fate to ensure my survival. And if I waited long enough, a being would come to liberate me from my cage." Sunny chuckled. "Weaver promised you freedom, huh?" The puppeteer stirred. "Freedom, survival, salvation." The winds howled above the silken making the strands of black silk billow fiercely, urgently. Sunny smiled darkly. "Did you not know that Weaver was a consummate liar? No, really, you would have been hard-pressed to find a more treacherous bastard to make a deal with." He shook his head. "Let me tell you, puppeteer. You should never trust the gods, but you should really never trust Weaver. Only a fool would. In fact, the only thing more foolish than that, would be to trust a cursed tyrant." Looking up, he stared the colossal black moth in the eye. "Let me ask you one question." Sunny sighed and raised his hand, stretching slowly. "Actually, I asked it already. As a matter of fact, it was more or less the first question I asked. Why are you talking to me?" He lowered his hands and regarded the puppeteer chillingly. "It wouldn't be to stall for time and make sure that I can't kill you before the sun sets, would it?" There was silence for a few long moments. And then, the soft voice resounded from nowhere once again. Only it wasn't so soft anymore. And neither did it resemble anything that could be even distantly mistaken for a human voice. Instead, an eerie, deeply disturbing, dreadful rustle shed over Sunny, making his skin crawl. "Arg, kill me." The world itself seemed to laugh at Sunny, full of scorn, sending his mind into a spin. "Your death is liberation. Ash tyrant, Weaver. Kept their promise. The puppeteer did not speak after that, but moments before they clashed, Sunny thought that he heard a dying echo drowning in the wind. He could barely discern the words. Your flame, so sweet, it's calling. 2,399 bound. Sunny did not know whether the puppeteer had told him the truth or woven intricate lies, shaping them to suit the mind of its prey. Perhaps it was both, with fragments of truth mixed in between deceit to make it all sound so much more believable and tantalizing. One thing was certain, though. Sunny had not believed even for a heartbeat that the puppeteer was above the malevolent madness all nightmare creatures seemed to suffer from. Maybe nightmare creatures were indeed driven mad by the call of the flame, just like awakened struggled to maintain their sanity when exposed to the call of nightmare. Perhaps the enormous black moth was indeed adept at suppressing its malice, somewhat. But not because it was truly free from the rabid compulsion to destroy and devour anyone and anything not twisted by the void. Rather, it was merely to lure its victims into a false sense of security, just like the puppeteer had attempted to lure Sunny. It had always intended to consume Sunny, at best. At worst, its intention was to turn him into a puppet, infect him with corruption, and make him its thrall. If so, Sunny was not inclined to believe the rest of what the giant moth had told him either. But still, what if the rest of it was indeed true? What if some of it was? What if the world as Sunny knew it, the existence itself, was nothing but a furnace where all of them were doomed to burn? If the purpose of all living things was merely to be fuel? The universe was a cage built to contain the void. But weren't all of them caged within it, as well? It was such a dreadful thought. Sunny felt that there was something wrong with that line of thinking. Even if the puppeteer had offered him some version of the truth, though, it had to have omitted something, changing the context and twisting the meaning of everything. But Sunny was not sure. He could not be sure, because the seeds of doubt had already been planted into his mind. Damnation! Even after realizing what was happening, Sunny could not do anything. All he could do was kill the puppeteer before these seeds sprouted into something that could not be contained. Luckily, the wasted time did not only benefit the eerie moth. With every minute that passed, Sun Yu was growing stronger. The evening star burned in the dark depths of the underworld armament, bestowing him with ferocious power. Of course, it was hungrily consuming his essence and willpower, as well, but that was a trade he was willing to make. Sunny had been lulled by the conversation with the puppeteer, but now, he shook that enthrallment off. And when he did, he felt a chill run down his spine, realizing that passing time was not the only thing he had been overlooking. In truth, Sunny had failed to notice quite a few things, as well. Come to think of it, he had been behaving peculiarly from the second his foot landed on the slope of the snow castle. Starting a conversation despite knowing better, humoring the puppeteer's suspiciously convenient claims, failing to pay attention to anything about his surroundings, except for the billowing strands of black silk. Most of all, forgetting that Kai and Slayer existed at all. What? How did why had Sunny not even thought to question what his companions were doing while he conversed with the cursed tyrant? Curses. Sunny hastily glanced around, casting his shadow sense out at the same time. His eyes widened, and fear grasped his heart with icy claws. Kai was hundreds of meters away. What looked like Kai, at least, in his transcendent form. A giant figure was buried under a slithering mass of black silk, straining desperately to tear itself free. Sunny could hear the muffled cries of a dragon as the great beast tore at the silk, midnight scales glinting through the gaps between the dark strands. Slayer was nowhere to be seen, as if swallowed by the billowing mass of black silk entirely. The puppeteer was still perched atop the mountain, motionless, looming above them like an eerie insectal deity. Most disturbing of all, was the fact that, without Sunny ever realizing it, impossibly thin strings had wrapped themselves around his limbs, penetrating his body, and reaching into his very soul. Sunny shuddered. Oh! Throwing a murderous gaze up, at the still figure of the colossal black moth, Sunny lunged forward. He tried, at least. But the black strings held him in place, controlling him like a marionette. Arg! A hint of panic flooded his mind like a dreadful wave. Suppressing it fiercely, Sunny strained against the invisible strings, feeling them tremble and give. His will cut at them like a blade, severing a few. But more took their place, piercing Sunny's flesh, soul, and spirit. These strings were both tangible and intangible. They restrained him physically, but much more perilously, they restrained him mentally as well. His mind was infected by doubt, and the puppeteer used that doubt to control him. When Sunny wanted to lunge forward, the strings strangled his determination to do just that, And so, he stayed in place, unable to force himself into commanding his body to move. You vile thing! Sunny growled and purged his mind, throwing it into the state of battle clarity. At the same time, he steeled his resolve and wrapped himself in an armor forged out of pure will. He rebuilt his consciousness around an indomitable axis. His killing intent, his cold, scathing, overwhelming desire to visit death and destruction upon the puppeteer. To tear that vile moth apart. Innumerable strings of black silk snapped. But even more surrounded him, binding him like a suffocating cocoon. Or a chrysalis, perhaps. Sunny let out a stifled scream, falling to his knees. The strings cut into his skin, drawing drops of crimson blood. Kill it, I must. Kill it, kill it. He had to kill. Grinning wickedly, Sunny commanded his blood to flow back into the thin cuts left on his body and released his physical form. His body turned into a mass of formless darkness. But he failed to escape the stranglehold of the puppeteer's strings, still, since they bound the shadows just as easily as the bound flesh. The vast shadow struggled and strained, enveloped by the web of black silk. Bound, trapped, unable to escape. Some distance away, no glimpses of the magnificent dragon could be seen through the billowing mass of glistening strands anymore, and no sound of him could be heard. Kai's figure was buried entirely under a dark hill of silk. Most of the sun was hidden behind the horizon, and the fiery splendor of radiant sunset was slowly turning into the dim twilight of dusk. 2,400 breaking the rules. Ah, Sunny could feel his mind slipping. The puppeteer loomed above the world like a dark cliff, the giant black orbs of its eerie black eyes staring down upon the slopes of the silken mountain dispassionately. Kai was still struggling to free himself from under the mass of black silk, but he was almost entirely immobilized by now. Sunny was straining against the puppeteer's strings, as well. But it was pointless. If they were only holding him in place, he could have torn them apart. He could have slithered his way out of their inescapable embrace, at least. But the strings bound his mind just like they were binding his shadow. His very thoughts were restrained, and Sunny could not even fathom trying to break free anymore. Time was running out. The only thought the puppeteer could not poison with doubt was the one Sunny kept repeating silently, using it as an axis that held his mind together and prevented it from falling entirely under the eerie nightmare Kriatuji's control. Kill it, I must kill it. His bloodlust was his only salvation. The vast shadows stirred. Sunny broke his mind apart into innumerable streams, abandoning most of them to free some from the insidious grasp of the puppeteer. He had to do something drastic. The time for desperate measures had come. And gone. Now was the time for pure madness. Sunny imagined himself taking a deep breath. Then, he took all his willpower, all his authority, all his killing intent, and all the power granted to him by the evening star. And used them to call forth a shade. If he thought about it, the puppeteer was really in a bad situation. Its true power lay in its thralls, but none of them were here to protect their master. The black moth stayed still and motionless, and that was not because it had no need to move, rather, it was because the snow tyrant was not that ferocious and physically strong. All it could do to deter the adversary was use its profane powers and peculiar will to reach it. On top of that, Sunny was more or less its natural predator. That was because Sunny commanded a legion of shades, and shades possessed neither will nor a sense of self. They had no desires, no resolve, no determination of their own. And therefore, they knew no hesitation. They were immune to doubt, because doubt was foreign to their very nature. There was nothing for the puppeteer to poison, so it was powerless to control the shades, it could only control their master. But as long as Sunny remained firm in his conviction, his shades would be able to do what he could not. There was just one enormous, mountain-sized problem. The puppeteer might have been weak in direct confrontation, but that was only in relative terms. It was still a cursed tyrant, no matter where its true talent lay. Not just any shade could face it in battle. The obsidian wasps would be destroyed by one flap of the puppeteer's wings. The shadow wolves would be vanquished and torn apart in an instant. Abundance would hold out longer, but it would not muster enough offensive power to kill the detestable moth before it was too late. The Rat King was vicious and annihilating, but it needed time to propagate and grow. Unstoppable, that only left the wolf. The ruthless, proud predator from the dawn of time, one ferocious and fatal enough to tear the puppeteer's wings off and crush its appalling head. And yet, Sunny was full of doubt. Would the wolf really be able to kill the snow tyrant? Would Sunny himself remain firm enough not to command his frightening shade into retreat? No, doubt made Sunny weak and indecisive. It made him feel despair. He still was in control of enough of himself to summon a shade, but he was not confident that the same would hold true in a few minutes. So, he did what he always did when forced into a corner. He cheated. The shade Sunny called forth was not an obsidian wasp, abundance, rat king, or the wolf. Instead, it was the shadow of another cursed tyrant. It was condemnation. Sunny had lost access to his shades after entering Ariel's game, but they still existed somewhere out there, within his soul. Other shades might have been summoned and carrying his orders, but condemnation wasn't. Because it had never answered his call before. Augmented by the evening star, Sunny's tyrannical will and his undeniable authority descended Uro on the somber giant, commanding it to emerge from the peaceful darkness of his soul. Sunny had thought that he would be able to overpower the obstinate tyrant while strengthened by the sacred memory. But he was wrong. His will and his authority crumbled against the unfathomable, inert depths of the enormous shade. Condemnation refused to move, just as it always had. It remained still and motionless, towering above the silent waters of his soul. Sunny had expected as much. After all, he had not been able to call upon any other shade Ned beyond the confines of Ariel's game, either. But while Sunny could not summon them with his Shadow Legion aspect ability, which the LAWS of this artificial realm were interfering with, that did not mean that he could not fool these laws. So, instead of commanding the gigantic shade to reveal itself, he simply gathered all his willpower and banished condemnation from his soul. He threw condemnation out. Sunny had never done something like that before, which did not mean that he couldn't. Now that he was supreme and wielded greater authority both over his soul and over the shades populating it, he could summon them forth and call them back. He could also store physical items within his soul and expel them from it, effectively manifesting them. And that was what he did with the vast, huge shade of condemnation. He expelled it. Sunny had not attempted to do that with any of his shades in the past for a good reason, though. Any shade he could not summon with his Shadow Legion aspect ability was a shade that did not obey his commands. That fact would not change even if he managed to summon it into existence, somehow, which meant that once the shadow of condemnation emerged into the light, Sunny would have no control over it whatsoever. It could attack the puppeteer. It could just as well attack him, instead. It could even remain still and do nothing, content to simply be. But that was a risk Sunny was willing to take, at the moment. In fact, he welcomed it. The potentially deadly drawback of summoning a disobedient shade was actually a life-saving grace in his current situation. Because if Sunny could not control condemnation, the puppeteer could not control Sunny to order condemnation to stand down. And since he was not using Shadow Legion to summon it, the laws of Ariel's game would, hopefully, fail to prevent the Shadow Colossus from appearing. Snow Tyrant, Ash Tyrant. Let's add a third tyrant into the mix, shall we? Let's break the rules. As innumerable strings of black silk fluttered in the wind, rushing to bind the vast shadow. Reality seemed to ripple. The sea of clouds swirled. And then, the mass of silk stands was torn apart when a huge hand emerged from Sunny's formless vastness, extending far into the sky and casting a titanic shadow onto the slope of the shuddering mountain.